explanation. Yesterday afternoon, I was here at the temple and I was filling out some forms, and I saw the door to Rabbi Feder's office was open, so I dropped in to say hello to Rabbi Feder on the afternoon before Yom Kippur, which is dangerous to do under any circumstances for a rabbi that's getting ready for Yom Kippur. In the middle of our conversation, she says, "Oh, by the way, what is your topic about?" And I responded to her and I said, "Actually, it's not what you think it is." At which point, she didn't ask the question any further. She simply said, "Can I use that tonight in services? Can I tell people that what you're talking about is not what you think it is?" Okay? Now, she never heard what it is, and I didn't share that with her, but it's not what you think it is. So let me start with my first interfaith experience, and then maybe you'll get a sense of where we're going from this thing. If you have a need to get up and leave because you've had enough of me, I understand that. This is Yom Kippur. And you have to do what helps your soul, not what helps my soul. So don't worry about it. So my first interfaith experience, it was Good Friday. I was 5 years old, living in the city of Detroit, and found myself completely and totally alone in my neighborhood because the entire neighborhood was Catholic, and the schools of Detroit, the public schools of Detroit, gave the kids Good Friday off so that they could attend Good Friday services. So I'm sitting there on my porch, and the 5 or 6 year old girl who lived next door to me, her name was Rosemary, she was gone for the whole day, and all of a sudden she came home, and I see her family comes home, and she walks over to my porch and she punches me in the face. "You killed Jesus." That was the message that Rosemary got from her attendance at Good Friday services. It's a wonder I didn't become a Hindu after that moment. But my response to Rosemary was, "I didn't kill Jesus. I don't even know Jesus." And it sort of spiraled from there. But that's one of the kinds of things that motivates people to think about things and how things are going. So let me set aside a couple of basics so that we're all on the same page. Number one, this discussion is not about Christianity. Because Christian nationalism is an expression of something that makes devout Christians nervous, makes them distressed because it's a distortion of their own understanding. When I ask someone, what does it mean to be a Christian? The usual response I get is, it means to be Christ-like. Well, what does it mean to be Christ-like? Well, you know, Rabbi. I love that. You know, Rabbi. It means that you're supposed to behave the way Jesus behaves as told in the Gospels of the New Testament. So, it depends on if I'm in a snarky mood or not. I may say something like, "Oh, you mean like keeping kosher?" "No, you don't get it, Rabbi." I say, "Well, Jesus was Jewish. He lived a Jew, died as a Jew." But this discussion has nothing to do with Christianity, only the adoption of a label, because the label helps the group disseminate their poison to a community that is not too interested in digging deeper behind what's in front of the facade that's there. So let me start by trying to define Christian nationalism as a movement that uses the label Christian to establish a political agenda that defines itself as saving America from all the other kinds of religions, and has a political agenda to make America a Christian country, not just sociologically, but legally, to pass whatever laws, constitutional amendments are necessary to redress what was wrong with our original Constitution, because it was formed by a bunch of deists who were not interested in creating a Christian country. They'd already been in Christian countries, and they knew that this was not a prescription for a democracy, at least what they had experienced. Time out. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, you should have been here in the summer. I had 4 weeks of Friday night services where I expressed the details about how we are not a Christian country. I'll give you the short version. After 200 years of Christian warfare, Christian against Christian in Europe over the Reformation, and the killing of some 2-3 million people in the process of these wars over the Reformation, the founders of our country here had every opportunity, if they wanted to declare America a Christian country. Could have been done in the Declaration of Independence. It certainly could have been done in the Constitution, and they chose not to. We need to respect that choice. This is not, by law, a Christian country. It is a country that, by law, recognizes the need to stand back from religion and allow religion to do its own thing. All right, that's the short form. You want the long form? It's too late. Christian nationalism is this political movement that's based on fear. I would call it terror. The worst fear of the Christian nationalist is that America is becoming unwhite and unchristian. It is a country that is so diverse that people who never had a voice in the public square are now being heard. People who stand up in a school in Texas where there are no Jews within 300 miles of the school district are being challenged about prayer at the football game by someone who's neither Jewish nor Muslim nor Christian, but an immigrant from South Asia who is Hindu and is not too comfortable with the idea of everybody on the football team bedding down in the middle of the football field before the game begins and organizing prayer. It's about the feeling that you're losing control. And the greater the feeling of loss of control, the greater the effort becomes on the part of the Christian nationalist to establish his or her identity as the identity of the country. Along the way, I'm going to be giving you some responses and hints as to how you deal with persons who come at you with Christian nationalism. I want this to be a practical experience for you. You know, how do you speak to a Christian nationalist? Okay? Well, one of them is, do you keep kosher? Jesus kept kosher. Are you kosher? I should point out, by the way, that one of the difficulties Christian nationalists have, one of their greatest difficulties, is having to deal with the image of Jesus in the New Testament. Because like his fellow Jews, Jesus was admonished by the book of Exodus, "You know the heart of the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You are responsible for the poor and the widow and the orphan, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Empathy is a Jewish requirement. And the last thing you will find among Christian nationalists is empathy for anyone who is not a Christian nationalist. Jesus was a paragon, of empathy. That's one of the reasons why he's such a powerful figure in literature, in religious literature, because the example was there. That's one of the reasons why Hitler understood in the 1930s that before he could be successful, he had to reduce the power of the Catholic Church in Germany. It was the one force that could have proven to be the biggest obstacle to his dream of domination. And that was why he took out after them, because these were the people who founded churches and hospitals and schools that were going to be most reluctant to sending the mentally deficient to gas chambers. It was not an easy thing to sell to devout Christians that this was the Christian thing to do. So the Christian nationalist, coming back to the present, the Christian nationalist has to find a way to deal with the image and personality of Jesus directly. My favorite one is the group that's up in Idaho. They have renamed themselves the Church of Christ Christian as opposed to the Church of Christ Jewish. The Church of Christ Christian, that's who we are. The Christian Christ. Now, Those of you, I know that at least one of you in the community who are, knowledgeable about this stuff, there was a heresy back in the 2nd century, the Marcion heresy, where a particular leader of the church wanted to declare everything Jewish as out of bounds for the new Christian denomination, this new Christian faith that he was proposing. And so he wanted to get rid of the entire Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, okay, and only focus on what was in the New Testament, and especially he didn't like the Gospel of Matthew because it was too Jewish, so he wanted to go on to the Gospel of Luke, which was less Jewish, at least overtly. And so this Marcion heresy, interestingly enough, an effort to make the church very, very, very muscle-bound, I must call it muscle-bound something, it wasn't Christianity. Part of that effort was to deny the fact that the God that we see in the Hebrew scriptures is the same God that we see in the New Testament. He came up with this idea that God of the Hebrew scriptures is this God of vengeance and law and rule, and the God of the New Testament is God of love and compassion and all those kinds of things. It was an interesting thing, but he failed, interestingly enough, because the early leaders of the church realized that part of their identity was caught up completely in Judaism. Okay, so that's all the preliminary stuff. Christian nationalism has to deal without Jesus. So if you want something to say to a Christian nationalist, ask them what they think about Jesus. And then point to them the few things, everybody who's Jewish gets enough Christianity on TV every day of the week so that you know enough to say, well, what do you think about Jesus being Jewish? How do you feel about that? And you can make somebody feel almost as uncomfortable as you feel answering questions from a Christian nationalist. Okay. So I'm going to build you a roadmap to Christian nationalism. And how many of you remember what a triptych was? You go to AAA and you say, I'm going to Kansas City and I need a triptych. Well, not to Kansas City. I'm going to Nebraska, I need a triptych. And they would give you this little booklet that had a spiral-bound booklet, and it had multiple pages, and you could flip a page and it would give you a direction and how you would go. Well, I'm going to give you a roadmap, a triptych to Christian nationalism. And the first thing on the first page of Christian nationalism triptych is martyrdom. You can't have a Christian nationalism without elevating the idea of martyrdom in your theology. It's good to die for God. And how does martyrdom come into the equation? Unfortunately, we invented it. We kept it out of the Hebrew scriptures, but it's in the Bible. It's in the books of the Bible in between the Hebrew scriptures and the Greek scriptures, in the Apocrypha, in the book of 2nd Maccabees, chapter 7. There's a description there of a woman, she's known as Hannah, and her 7 sons. And this story is told, the story is written in probably the year 75 before the Common Era. This is 2nd Maccabees, and it's trying to clean up all the things that were ambiguous in 1st Maccabees. And one of the things it tries to do is talk about how people had the courage to stand up for Torah. So the story of Hannah and her 7 sons is this woman has 7 sons, and they all refuse to eat pork, which is what the king Antiochus IV is trying to convince the Jews to do. And each one of them, each of the 7 sons, as he announces his refusal to eat pork, is tortured horrifically and killed. But before they die, each one of them makes a declaration, and the declaration is, I know that the God who created me is not going to abandon me, and in the next life I will be... So they actually use the term the next life. This is the first mention of life after death in a Jewish context. Most people aren't even aware that this is the case. But you see, dying for a cause is so much easier if you think that dying is going to lead you to a better life beyond. So in order to be a good Christian nationalist, you got to think of yourself as sacrificing whatever is in your life. It's good to sacrifice because God will reward you. Now, remember, there are all kinds of religious denominations and theologies that have the same idea, Dying is what helps a terrorist. Knowing that giving up his life with a suicide belt around his waist is going to somehow benefit him in the presence of God is something that motivates and initiates that kind of behavior. So on the roadmap, you got to have an understanding of martyrdom that somehow works for you. It's good to die for a cause, and then it also makes it easier for you to kill for the same cause. Page 2 in the triptych is orthodoxy. This is small o orthodoxy. Orthodoxy meaning right doctrine. I like to say orthodoxy, if you are orthodox anything, it means I'm right and you're wrong. I have the truth and you don't. My orthodoxy trumps your anything because my sources are truthful and yours are lies. My orthodoxy means that you and I cannot have a discussion because how do you have a dialogue with someone who begins the conversation by saying, oh, by the way, I'm correct and you're wrong? It's nonsense. You can't do it. So in order to have, by the way, I should have pointed out, all of these pages in the triptych are going to be part of the roadmap to Christian nationalism. But individually, we have all kinds of religious traditions that have pieces of the puzzle, pieces of the roadmap. They don't put it all together into one unit. So orthodoxy is absolutely essential because you have to be able to be so sure that what you're doing is the right thing and what everyone else is doing is the wrong thing is absolutely number one in your songbook or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we've got martyrdom, we have orthodoxy. What's next? Well, I think one of the things you have to have along the way is the notion that you are saving the country from something that is far worse. That whatever you represent is something that the country doesn't need at this time. And I'm going to say that this next page is called A Christian Nationalist's Moral Compass. The moral compass that Christian nationalism operates goes in whatever direction the leader of Christian nationalism wants it to go. It's not a morality like you and I understand it. It's a morality that's flexible enough to work in any political system. Oh yeah, there has to be an authoritarian leader to make Christian nationalism work. Look at any and all of these denominations that are Christian nationalist denominations, the ones that are studied and investigated and looked at because of their political connections and their connections to violations of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Control Acts and all those kinds of things, and explosives and everything else. The willingness to do this is because somebody in authority, whether alive and kicking or dead and writing, someone has written something that impressed you and inspired you to become a Christian nationalist. Your moral compass cannot be one that has any empathy for people who are poor, weak, unlike you. It's got to say, whatever you do, the means justify the end. The end justifies the means. My desire to have Christian nationalism succeed overrides any and all considerations of law. And therefore, laws are meaningless to the Christian nationalist if they oppose the operation that he's engaged in. Okay. So, Christian nationalism works best when you can isolate the community. There's a reason why we don't find a Christian nationalist movement in downtown Clayton. It's not isolated enough. It needs to be a place where you can build walls and fences around a community and control who gets in and who does not get in. Who can interact with Christian nationalists and who is not allowed to interact with Christian nationalists. You get to control the membership in ways that the temple can't control the membership. You get to review each and every person's credentials to make sure that they belong in your community. You can't do that in a well-populated urban situation unless you can buy an apartment building somewhere off to the side and keep everybody out of the building. And if you're thinking that a lot of this stuff sounds like a religious cult, that's exactly what it is. You control access to the community, you control access to information, and you control access to opinions other than the one you have about your religious community. So in the world I inhabit as a chaplain of the FBI, I get to walk in and out of offices of the St. Louis Division, among others, and one of my favorite things, on the wall in a supervisory special agent's office, who I can't mention by name, in his office is a poster. The poster is about this big. And the poster has the symbols of 28 different terror organizations and their symbols, how they identify themselves to other members of the organization. See, they're worried, the Christian nationalist is worried, that other people are looking. They should be worried. They are looking. How do I keep people outside the group from intruding in our business? You got to have signs, like gang signs. You have little things, numbers. Number 8, letters of the alphabet, things that symbolize Adolf Hitler. The way of signaling to one another, you have your own code language, and the code language is part of this Christian nationalist movement. On that chart, by the way, not all of them were Christian nationalists. Of the 28, about 7 were carrying Christian symbols and used words that would be terminology derived from the Christian church. Just for your information, the publisher of the poster is the Anti-Defamation League. And the publisher of the poster, the Anti-Defamation League, does the research to back up the labeling of the organizations and shares it with law enforcement at a special website for the ADL and law enforcement. So that's, if you're looking for an excuse as to why you should give a contribution to the ADL, not a bad thing to do, because they do the work. They do the research, and they can back it up. So we've got willingness to die for the cause, willingness to kill for the cause, an orthodox authoritarian structure where you get to define what the rules of the body are, and if I don't follow the rules, I become a heretic. I'm outside the organization. All of these things are all part and parcel of the roadmap to becoming a Christian nationalist. One other thing about the being outside the rules and inside the rules. I have a personal abhorrence of the word blasphemy. You may see this in newspaper articles. Unfortunately, many times it's about the country of Pakistan, where some poor individual will be accused by his village of blaspheming against the Quran, or blaspheming against the Prophet, or blaspheming against something. And even though the laws of Pakistan prohibit execution based on blasphemy, the opposite happens. It's all too common along the way. Blasphemy is one of the words I would ask a Christian nationalist about, like sort of in casual conversation over a beer. What do you think about blasphemy? I don't know how you bring it up. I really don't. What do you think about blasphemy? Now, if they understand the word blasphemy, and they respond, well, anybody who commits blasphemy. Now, what is blasphemy? Technically, it's supposed to be you are denying the existence of God. Did the ancient Hebrews observe Yes, they did, unfortunately. They did. It was part of their historical structure. It was part of our tradition. Certain people could commit certain acts, and it was considered blasphemous. Like having a BLT on the altar in the sanctuary in Jerusalem, that would be considered blasphemous, okay? A punishable, I imagine in the Hebrew world, punishable by death by execution. There are even moments in the Hebrew Scriptures where the person who is being zealous for God is commended for having ended a person's life because they had committed blasphemy. In the world of the Christian nationalists and in the world of other religious nationalists and cults like this, blasphemy is one of the most dangerous tools at their disposal because it creates an us versus them dynamic, and they are trying to ridicule your God. They're ridiculing your Bible. They're ridiculing your holy sacred scriptures. You can't let that pass by. You have to deal with it. And this is an excuse for murder. And that's how it is used. And in some of these isolated communities, some of the deaths go unreported because no one is willing or able to make the connection between the person's religious identity and his contact with a group such as this and the outcome of what happened to him in life. So blasphemy is one of those things you keep looking for. Isolation, blasphemy, orthodoxy, martyrdom, no moral compass that doesn't respond to the leader of the group. That's the roadmap. Okay, I'm done speaking. I've accomplished what I thought I was going to accomplish. I told you it wasn't going to be what you thought it was going to be. Okay. And I'll now take your comments and your questions if you want. Okay, now that we've just solved the problem and everything, we're good? Yes, go ahead.
How has the internet impacted the rise of Christian nationalism? Because those aren't people that are necessarily isolated.
The biggest the internet is, I'm answering, I should have let you finish, I apologize. I'm not moving from here because I want to stay roughly on camera. And Derek told me I had to stay here. The internet is a phenomenal tool, but it's also one of the things that makes this so difficult. Groups such as this that are secretive, and they want to remain secretive, have the ability to close themselves off from others who don't have access to their internet pathways and so on and so forth. The internet also, because you can Google anything and you can find this stuff out, is a great way for people who are looking into this stuff to try to discover what it is. But usually there's a second level of access, and the second level is controlled heavily by the Christian nationalist movement. The dark web, not things that you would see publicly, and the kind of things that people who are expert at penetrating the dark web can go, and when they're investigating somebody like that, they will make sure that they're doing the entire computer history of the person if they're being charged with a crime. The internet makes it possible for people who, one guy in Kansas and one guy in Nebraska and one guy in Florida, getting together in a way they could never have done before. And there are enough nuts in America that can get together on the internet and form a party of some kind, or a club or whatever. And what you find in all of this is that a lot of these groups are tiny. They're absolutely small. It might be 3, 4, 5 followers and a guy who can draw a logo. And the guy who can draw the logo is the most important person because that's what's going to be their internet presence out there for everybody. And they know that the internet and the internet police, there's no such thing, but the people who are trying to police the internet are looking for these common symbols. So they try to be very subtle about it, and then they end up being comically subtle in setting these symbols. The internet allows people to communicate with one another who could never communicate before because they didn't know you existed. They can forum, chat, text message, all these kinds of things, and no one is aware that this activity is going on. And each one of these forms of communication carries with it great potential and also great risk.
What do you think of 2025 where that was?
Oh, the 2025 political thing? Okay, Project 2025. I'm going to answer this from the 1920s. A certain person wrote out his entire political agenda while he was sitting in jail. I think it was a Munich jail, if I'm not mistaken. It was a jail in Bavaria. He wrote his entire program, and no one believed him. If someone is writing a political program and at the same time is running for office, that's when I got to pay attention. What do I think about it? I think we got to pay attention to it. I really do. And I think, and by the way, daylight and exposure is like Roman cleanser. It's like it bleaches out some of the worst effects of this stuff. The more people, what I ask you to do is ask people, if you're concerned about this stuff, ask people what they think about Project 2025. See what their reactions to it. See if they know about it. Are you aware that, by the way, we have to become aware of what's in that document. You can get it on the line, like everything else. Find out what the actual content is, and yet that gives you a leg up on everybody else, because they're assuming you're not going to take the trouble to read it. If you take the trouble to read it, it becomes scary. But if we don't read it and we don't pay attention to it, it becomes even more dangerous.
Some of the things going on currently, Bibles in school in Oklahoma, 10 Commandments being posted in classrooms, is that Christian?
My take on the Bible in Oklahoma is can we talk? Yeah, I'm on the internet right now. And, you know, great, we got real privacy. First of all, the last thing that any mainstream religious community wants, and I'm including the mainstream Christian community wants, is a public school teacher teaching Bible. You may not realize this, but the fact that we have a public school system at all is because there was a dispute between Protestants and Catholics in 19th century America about which Bible to use in the school. And the Catholic school system was created largely because they didn't trust the Protestants to do right by them in public school with the Protestant Bible. So most of these groups are a little bit disconcerted by having people teaching the Bible who really don't know what they're reading, even from the standpoint of the individual religious community. I know what the next step is. We're going to invite teachers from various denominations to come and give classes on the Bible from their perspective. Do I have a problem with that? Not if it's done honestly. Not if you actually set it up so that you're actually bringing people from the outside who have classes, degrees, whatever, in that subject and are teaching the subject. I don't have a problem with that. My problem is when you take a teacher who is chairman of the Wednesday night Bible group at the local Missionary Baptist Church, and that's the person that's teaching Bible on Thursday morning in the public school. And the perspective is going to be, right out of that same thing. The problem is that's why we had a First Amendment that said Congress shall make no law respecting religion or the free exercise thereof. Get them out of the schools. That's my, no one's going to listen to me. So if I got to have Bibles in the school, at least I'd like to have them taught by people who know what they're teaching. Now, that probably didn't answer your question.
Well, I guess is they a part of the Christian nationalism movement?
No. Let's thank you. Okay, I apologize. That reminds me that when I'm talking about Christian nationalism, I'm not talking about the people who think it's a nice thing to have Bible passages read at the start of the school day. When it's discussed in the case of, well, we're going to have Bible read in class, why can't we have a Good Friday service in the lunchroom when we're all celebrating, and have everybody in the school attend this service, that's when I have a problem with it. When it becomes coercive. And by the way, parents can't opt out of these things. They think, oh yeah, we give him a choice. He can go sit in the bathroom for an hour while we have this class. That's not a choice. And that's not fair at all. I can't be in favor of that kind of coercion. Communities, this is not Christian nationalism. This is Christians wanting to improve the world they see around them, and the way they think it's improved is by having people read Scripture. I have some passages I'd love them to read that would cause them not to want to read Scripture ever again. The story of Judah and Tamar, where Judah does not fulfill his obligation by giving his third son to a woman who has already caused two of this guy's sons to die by strange circumstances. And under the rules of levirate marriage, she was supposed to be the bride of the next son in line. And Judah decided not to give her this third son. And so what did she do? Tamar goes and dresses like a prostitute and sits by the fork in the road and entices Judah to have sex with her in order to produce a child in fulfillment of his obligations. You will not find that story in the Reader's Digest version of the Bible. In the 1970s and early 80s, they published a Reader's Digest version, maybe it was the Trump version, I don't know, a Reader's Digest version of the Bible, and that was one of the sections that they took out. They didn't want that section in there about a father-in-law having sex with his daughter-in-law in order to produce a child that would be considered the child of the first son. Try to explain that to an 8-year-old. Try it. So there are some parts of the Bible that make people uncomfortable. And one of the another good way of dealing with it is, which parts of the Bible would you like us not to read? There's a lot of killing that goes on in the Bible, and it's divinely sanctioned killing. It makes me uncomfortable even to read it. I don't know why I'm sort of free associating, but there was a time in the history of Congregation Temple Israel when the book of Leviticus would not be read at services on the Sabbath, except in the summer when no one came to services. So even though the book of Leviticus would be scheduled for April, May, it was moved to the summer, and we lifted the book of Deuteronomy and we moved it to April, May, because people never got to hear Deuteronomy because they were always away for the summer. Okay? Rabbi Isserman of blessed memory hated the book of Esther because at the end of the book of Esther, Jews are killing Persians left and right, the descendants of Haman. And he thought, probably rightly so, that the contents, the whole contents of the book of Esther, were not conducive to creating harmony between Jews and non-Jews. You have all of these, as described in the book of Esther, these Jews wreaking revenge on the Persian descendants of Haman the Agagite. I mean, it was just, not everything in the Bible is kosher. Go ahead.
So do you have a sense of the size of the Christian national community? Already have a sense of just how large it is now?
It's almost impossible. Everyone's guessing, okay? I could make some blanket statements like it's probably larger in the western United States than it is in the eastern United States because there's total lack of contact with other communities. The strength of the local churches has a lot to do with it. Isolation has a lot to do with it. I threw out a number. What would it mean? 5%? You know, I have no idea. Most of these groups are tremendously small, and their excitement is generated when they can pretend to be much larger than they actually are. They're more like cells of people who are like-minded in all of that stuff. I mean, with all of the hubbub and the furor over what took place on January 6th, each one of these groups, they were agglomeration of a bunch of these groups, but none of them had more than a few hundred members in it. They were just very vocal and knew how to play the media like a violin. There's no way to know. Oh, by the way, do you want to be the census taker who goes into this Christian national community and say, oh, and are you a Christian nationalist? You know? Yeah. Oh, I got to share something before I go to the next one. Before I came in here, my son shared with me a video. We were talking about Yom Kippur and sports, and he mentioned the fact that the quarterback for Brigham Young University is Jewish. His name is Jacob Retzlaff. And he is now a star quarterback for Brigham Young University. And those of you who don't know, Brigham Young University is a Mormon school. It's created by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's a beautiful video. I mean, it talks about how he loves being in Brigham Young University. He thinks it's a great school, how the community has wrapped its arms around him. He walks around campus with a Magen David around his neck. I mean, his teammates encourage him to be as Jewish as he wants to be in the context of the whole thing. It's a truly beautiful story, and Google it. It's a worth video. But I'm getting a big kick out of the fact. Look where we've come since Sandy Koufax. The idea was Sandy Koufax and Hank Greenberg were two famous stories of people involved in playoff games during Yom Kippur. And the Jewish community, in the eras in which this happened, we made them heroes because they refused to play on those days, and they were upholding their Jewish values. What's changed in society is we're so astonished that there's a quarterback at Brigham Young University who's wearing a Magen David. Hey, get out there. Come on, let's, we want to see that on a video when he comes in. I don't know if he can wear it under his jersey or not. We love that kind of stuff. And here is a guy who's raised in a Reformed congregation, bar mitzvahed. Now he's playing the big time, and the school is ranked what? 14th? 14th in the country. It'll be a kind of interesting story. I did interrupt. Sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
When a certain senator from Missouri talks about white Christian nationalism and Christianity, is that the type of white Christian nationalism that you think?
What was the first part?
When a certain senator from Missouri talks about
Oh.
white Christian nationalism and white Christianity, do you think that's the same type of?
Yeah, I do. What it is the issue here now is imposing. What are you imposing on me? What are you forcing me to do because you want to be a resident of a Christian country? What is it that you want me to do? Is it blue laws? You want me to close stores on Sundays so that you can observe the Sabbath? Is that Christian, the kind of Christian nationalism that some politicians are into, is more about making people who might vote for them based on the fact that they think this guy can be, he's like me. He has the same fears I do. He wants to have the same country. Do I think that candidate for office will put a bomb around his waist? No way. I think it's a transactional purpose that's being done. But people who are spending money and supporting that campaign, some of that money is going to come from Christian nationalists. This is a way to legitimize themselves.
Sorry. What I'm seeing, mostly like in my husband's family, but in a lot of Christian, non-denominational Christian churches, is the influence of Christian nationalism within the church, where people are beginning to feel that the government is trying to...
I got to slow down the question because I got to repeat it for everyone who didn't hear it. Okay? So the question's about the influence that Christian nationalists have within established churches, making people feel uncomfortable about what's going on in the society around them.
Yeah, what I'm seeing too is that the pastors of some of these churches, depending upon which church it is, some embrace it because it brings in money.
Okay,
and
so
others try to open
here's something I do know something about, okay? What influences clergy making decisions on the pulpit and what comes out of the pulpit and everything else. If you know that a certain behavior is going to bring people into the community, you have a choice, embrace it or not embrace it. And I have watched from afar, I've not seen any of my Jewish colleagues do it, but I've watched from afar as people embrace some very extreme positions in the name of Christian unity, when in fact it's neither Christian nor unifying. It's very divisive. And it's a perception that this is a way to keep and enable the health of the community, financial health, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, we are all subject to those kinds of pressures, of wanting to be accepted, of wanting, and by the way, tremendous amount of pressure by Christian nationalist groups on pastors who don't toe the line. They're not following the orthodox line about prayer in the public schools, about abortion and a few other things. So these are the people that, the minute someone takes a position against them, all of a sudden they became to the left of Karl Marx as far as the way they're treated by their own community. They know this kind of shaming works.
But what I've seen, like in some of these groups, my husband's family, because there's a lot of non-denominational Christians, is that these are very good people, but they get inundated with this, the country is moving away from
That's
Christian
the
values, and you have to
What sells? It's just marketing, okay? It's the idea that sells to people that are afraid of what's happening to their world.
But how do you fight that?
You
Because it's
cannot.
very scary.
Well, I hate to be. You can't fight it. Oh, you can have ADL publish other pamphlets, but they're not going to listen to ADL pamphlets.
And there's a lot of them.
You can't. You can only fight it one person at a time and take aside one person that you know and say, you know where this stuff is coming from. And you know that in your world, I have no place in your world because I am a blasphemer in your world. I follow a different approach to God or not. It's interesting, the one-on-one works a lot better than trying to find the right piece of PR material that's going to sell and people, all of a sudden, someone's going to put a letter in someone's mailbox. There's a 90% chance they'll throw it away. There's a 10% chance they'll read it, and a 2% chance they'll do something about it. You put out this stuff in the hopes that somebody will see it and adopt it. Can't stop it. And you can't put out your own 50 million pieces of mail hoping to reach the rational community and speak to their better angels and so on. It doesn't work that way.
Well, what I'm seeing right now within this country is it's a snowball effect where.
Well, unfortunately, we have our duty to do, and that's what this is all about.
Right.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I actually grew up in the midst of what I would now call white Christian nationalism. I was homeschooled. I was in these circles where they never would use that label, but it was like there were things that were glorified, exactly what you were saying about how they lifted up, like how we should love the flag, we should love the nation, this is the greatest nation in the world, and these narratives would kind of weave together and build on each other, and they wove into Christianity, and you have manifest destiny, and like this idea of imperialism and ownership of the land, and how we're supposed to steward it, steward the government.
I think it was. I think it was a wake-up call on January 6th when they see Christian nationalists burning flags.
Wow.
You know,
I mean, it's something where, not all homeschool groups were like that, but this particular group was. And to be inundated by that as a young person, I think that I'm just so thankful to have gotten away from that and to have a different perspective. And I see a lot of my peers doing the same thing, and I hope to see more of that, where people can understand, like, we're all just people, we're all just people, and how can we support each other and love each other better, and that seems to be, that theme of love seems to be able to defeat the fear that is just surrounding us.
First of all, thank you for sharing his story with us. How long ago did you get to us? It makes a lot of sense, but you're also, if you want kids to do something, have their parents do the opposite. It's like, I mean, I say it facetiously, but what happens is that when someone is closed off from the world, there's always some part of that world that intrudes, and you start asking questions like, well, what's that all about? Where did that come from? And that sort of is what we do. Let me pause here and say that I'm speaking to the choir here, mostly. And I don't get chances to speak to the shepherds that lead the flocks. I do once in a while. I do that through the police chaplaincy program, where we have a minimum of 9 religious denominations participating. But the message I get across is, I'm waiting for you to stand up to Christian nationalists. I don't have to stand up to Christian nationalists. I want you and your church to stand up to Christian nationalists. I want you to speak out about what Christian nationalism has done to Christianity. The distortion of a religious philosophy that has merit. I mean, it's you have, and unfortunately, I don't hear enough of that. I get letters of support and a message about, well, we're thinking about you and praying for Israel and all that stuff. And I always have to ask myself in the back of my mind, is he praying for Israel because it needs to be part of the eschatological completion of the Christian vision of the world coming to an end and the rapture and all of the resurrection of the dead and all that? Or is it because he actually cares? It's hard to figure out, but I want more people outside the Jewish community speaking about this stuff than inside the Jewish community.
How much of Christian nationalism do you think is in law enforcement?
I can't speak for all. I can only speak for locally. And I would have to say virtually none. Conservative Christian, yes. That's different than Christian nationalism. You know, a person who would homeschool his kids because he wants them to get a good Christian education, that's not the same thing as Christian nationalism. These officers of police and so on, they know where this goes. They know what, now, I can only speak for this area. I don't know what goes on in Nebraska. I keep picking on Nebraska. Why don't we? Anybody here from Nebraska?
In kind of a similar vein, I worry about Christian nationalism in the military. I've worked with the military, and I get why they say there are no atheists in foxholes. Like, I've never been in a foxhole, but that sounds terrifying. I get that. But I worry that, I mean, there were members of the military there on January 6th, and I worry that if the wrong person, a Christian nationalist, makes it up to general, these folks are trained to follow orders.
It's kind of a curious path that this follows. There is a case, I don't know if it got to the Supreme Court, but there is a case of a chaplain at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, and someone who is promoting Christian values in a way that made Jewish officers uncomfortable, and they challenged it. I apologize for not knowing the details of the case. I don't think he was a Christian nationalist. However, there's a sociological reason why this happens. Fundamentalist Christian denominations do not pay their pastors well. They do not receive the kind of support that some of the mainline Protestants, Methodists, and Episcopalians, and so on. Fundamentalists who come out of, for example, the Assemblies of God, the Pentecostals, and so on. The path to a decent life, a middle-class life for their families, is through the military chaplaincy. So you have people who become chaplains who find it a transformation of their entire being, and yet they are still advocates for the religious tradition that they came from. And part of being a member of some of these denominations, especially if the word evangelical is in the name, is being obligated by God, as you understand it, to proclaim the gospel to everyone you come in contact with. They are giving a great gift to that person by doing so. And praying in the name of Jesus is so second nature to them that they don't know any other way to behave. And the minute someone calls them on it and says, you know, not every cadet here at the academy is Christian. We actually have Muslims in the Air Force Academy. We have Jews here. Can you find a way to include them in whatever it is you're doing? They're having a tough time doing it. But what gives me hope is the way in which federal institutions are seeing this as part of their behavior and taking steps to alleviate it. I have a recommended packet of religious services if they're going to be performed by chaplains in the FBI. And it tells me what I can't say. And if you don't think I got some colleagues who are really upset about that, what do you mean I can't say in Jesus' name? What do you mean I can't pray this way? This is the way I always pray. Well, you're working for an institution that represents all of America. And you have to change the way you're thinking. So it's interesting to me that, don't tell certain people running for office now, but that these things are taking place in terms of diversity education among people who are supposed to be providing religious services to people on a non-denominational basis. So there's change there. I have a feeling the way things are going, someone who is an evangelical Pentecostal, someone who's really caught up in that, is not going to rise that high in the ranks because there are other things going on that would prevent it. I asked one of our friends in St. Louis, he was a reserve captain in the Navy, chaplaincy. And I said, will you ever be an admiral? And he says, no, it's not our term. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, in the reserves, there's one Jewish, one Protestant, one Catholic, and they rotate to see who gets to be a rear admiral. And he said, I'm timing out my captaincy, equivalent of a colonel in the Army. He said, I'm timing out, so I will be permanently retired from the military, not just the reserves, and I won't be able to, raise to flag rank or whatever they call it. It's kind of intriguing. It's nice to know that they had my luck, I ran into the one Jewish admiral as chaplain. His name is Rabbi Bert Korn. He was a rabbi in Philadelphia, famous guy. Wrote a terrific history of the Civil War and the Jews. And named Bertram Korn, and he did not like me at all. Yeah. Good.
So I'm trying to reconcile what I think I heard was your message, that Christian nationalism, isolated, small groups, insular, but yet I think the fear maybe what motivated some people to come here today is how their hate and racism, anti-Semitism is spreading to become more mainstream, that their message is becoming more mainstream, and how we fear how that's going to impact.
I have to tell you that I am more concerned about the people who are advocating for a free Palestine in terms of their long-term effect on the Jewish community than I am on the Christian nationalists. Now, this is the problem, differentiating between kinds of Christians and how hateful they are. There's a litmus test you can perform. Okay? Someone comes to you and says, I want to teach you about Jesus. If your response to them is, no thanks, I'm Jewish, their reaction can be one of several responses. One, well, they're Jewish and we know Jews are stubborn. Okay? Two, well, he's just ignorant. If I teach him, he'll come to love this thing and he will adopt this and he will become part of our religious community. If you reject them after those two efforts, then you're doing it out of spite and the devil made you do it. The devil it's the reason why you cannot accept Christianity is because you are of the devil. Well, friends, when you're labeled you are of the devil, you're done. This conversation is over. And that is a part of that whole idea. Taking responsibility. Why did you do that? The devil made me do it. I didn't do it. It was the devil working within me. That's why I spent 6 months in a massage parlor. You know, the devil made me do it. Did the devil fill out your American Express bill?
How do you address the Christian nationalist fear of loss of power or standing?
It's real. Their fear of loss of power is real because that's what's happening in America.
How do you address that?
You can't. I mean, I'll address it. Get used to it. We've been living it for 2,000 years. For 2,000 years, we were not the majority. We're still not the majority. How did we make accommodation? We made sure that the minority had rights that could not be trampled on by the majority. And when someone says, why do you get so upset about something going on that has nothing to do with you? Why are you so involved in it? It's because when you trample on the rights of someone who is not like you, I'm the next guy you're going to trample on. I'm the next person whose rights are going to be taken away. The only way I can protect myself is to make sure that everyone's rights are recognized and protected by law, not just by toleration. I don't want to be tolerated. I want people to recognize that I have a right to do these kinds of things. So I lost where my train of thought. What was the beginning of the question?
The question is, if you're having a conversation with one, how would you help have them address the fear and their loss?
I would say, number one, the fear is very real because that's what's happening to America. And that's what's already happened in most of the world. There are very few places you can go that does not have intermingling of population. Did you ever watch that show, Finding Your Roots, with Henry Louis Gates on public television? And at the end of the thing, he does that DNA thing, and he shows where all these people have DNA from all over the world. I love that, because no one gets through that section without being surprised that you got a relative somewhere you didn't expect to have a relative, because we're all one people. That's what the important thing. I got to stop here because I'm supposed to be done at 1:30. Thank you all. Shana Tova to you all.